Time I was on mute. I'm so sorry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Violet Barton. I'm the president of the UC Merced Graduate Student Association. Welcome to our podcast with the Native and Indigenous Student Coalition at UC Merced. Today is March 25th, 2018. Before we go on, I would like to pause to acknowledge all local Indigenous peoples that inhabit Abya, including the Yokuts and Miwok, who inhabit this land. We embrace their continued connection to this region and thank them for allowing us to live, work, learn, and collaborate on their traditional homeland. Let us take a moment to pay respect to the elders and to all Yakuts and Miwok people, past, present, and future. Thank you so much. I would like to also introduce my colleague, GSA Officer Asim. Asim, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, I'm GSA Officer and I'm really happy to be here with you guys.
Thank you so much, Asim. I appreciate you being here. I think I said 2018. I want to correct, make sure we're in 2022. I think my brain lives in the past. So to get going, I would like to ask our NISC representatives to please tell us about yourselves, your name, your graduate group, your research a little bit, and about your Indigenous background.
Hello, everyone. My name is Irene Gonzalez. I'm a fourth year critical race and ethnic studies major with a minor in Chicano studies. I'm a fourth year undergrad at UC Merced, and I'm really, in my undergraduate journey, I've been involved with the Native and Indigenous Student Coalition. I was introduced my first year at a student organizing conference at UCLA by Alondra, and ever since we made a connection, I became part of the Native Indigenous Student Coalition, and now as my fourth year, I am part of a group together where we co-lead. And a little bit of background about me is that I come from an Indigenous school in Los Angeles called Semillas Community Schools, or Anahualcalmeca and Xinaxcalmeca. And there is where I learned about my Indigenous roots. I learned how to speak Nahuatl. Our maestro was from Mexico, specifically Guerrero. And I also learned how to do danza azteca and other things as well as martial arts, and really going to that school helped mold who I am today. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Hi everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My name is Danielle Bermudez. I'm a grad student here at UC Merced. I'm in the interdisciplinary humanities program in my last year, hopefully finishing up soon. And I first came here through a master's program and actually began working with Professor Robin DeLugan, and her research focuses on Indigenous communities in El Salvador, specifically Nahuatl Pipiv communities. And I would say my involvement with NISC also came through working with Robin, but meeting other graduate students that were involved with NISC and were kind of starting the club at the time. So I remember like Hunter was really a part of kind of the creation of NISC, and then Alejandro, who is also an integral part of NISC, as another graduate student. Alejandro was really involved with NISC and invited me to join some of the drumming circles. And ever since then, you know, I've been excited to really work on learning, right? Now, as Irene said, it's really important to connect back with our ancestry and our roots. And, you know, I would identify as an Indigenous descendant. My family is from El Salvador, but I know we have Nahuatl people connections and ties. I know my positionality is not living in El Salvador and not being with the Indigenous communities I'm part of, but I think it's really important to really connect and learn that history, learn the languages. And so yeah, it's a little bit about NISC, and it's been really exciting working with Irene and working with, it's an undergrad and grad club, so it's been really exciting working together and doing different events and, working with the community and the professors. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay, great. So before I move on to the next question, Alejandro, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
And maybe we can come back to the question with Alejandro until we situate the technology here, the sound. So maybe go with the next question, please.
Oh yeah, okay. So I'm wondering that how does your indigenous background influence your research? Is your research related to your background, and do you feel that it will affect on your research or not?
Who did you want to answer first? I'm sorry.
You can start.
Okay. It definitely does affect my research. I feel like it's my identity. So in some ways, I feel like I can't really separate the research from it. But just like Danielle was saying, like, as well as like my positionality, like I'm not in Mexico from where my ancestors are from and living in Mexico, but I here and I feel like I still feel that it's important to think about our ancestors and family that are out there and, think about them. And when I think about my research, I always think how it's always towards like uplifting the voices and sort of giving them a space, because I feel like these structures and especially these institutions, like it's most of the time it feels like it's not made for us. So I feel like one of the things that what I feel like NISC is, its like mission is to make these spaces for like healing and just like spaces in general for people to take up space and sort of use their voice and feel empowered through drumming circles, through panel discussions, through film screenings, through singing gatherings, through anything. Just holding that space to me is what I feel that matters.
That's similar to Irene. Like the question of how does in my indigenous background influence your research? I would think it's definitely driven the way I've pursued research in grad school. And so, my research focuses on El Salvador. The indigenous name for El Salvador is Cuxcatan. And so I work with indigenous communities in El Salvador, specifically Nahuatl Pipil. And right, the Nahuatl Pipil come from, right, we know our ancestry is coming also from Mexico or Mexico, with the Nahuatl communities in Mexico. And we're part of a group that immigrated to El Salvador or Cuxcatan. And I think, part of it is, it's very personal, right? Audre Lorde always says the personal is political, and vice versa. And so doing my research, I take it very personally, in the kind of passion I pour into the work I want to do. And in 2018, I was able to go on a research grant to El Salvador and work with the communities one-on-one. And that was very transformational for me. So I would say definitely my connection to my indigenous background with Nahuatl Pipil and knowing the language, right, a little bit, or learning the language of Nahuatl Pipil, and also learning now at Huasteca Veracruzana from Mexico, right? Like that's been so amazing to be able to make those connections, to know more about the history, the culture, and the language, and really put it into my work. And I think it's so important because, there's not a lot of that in academia. We're not really seeing a lot of representation at, the highest levels of the professoriate. And so I think it's really important to have people from within the communities also being the ones that are speaking and talking about their own work and having their own kind of agency in their own research. So I would say definitely it really influences my research background. Like Irene said, I think it's very important. And I know maybe Alejandro wants to add more.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alejandro Cermeño. First, I want to apologize for coming a little late. I was in a meeting that ended a little later, but I did catch this last question. It was, how does your indigeneity influence the work that you do? Is that right? Okay, so in my case, it influences everything. First of all, understanding how colonial histories have shaped the current conditions of Latinx people, indigenous peoples, has everything to do with how we live, our life chances, our access to our own cultural resources, or lack of access, exclusion. So the work that I do is focused on how reconnecting to our indigenous roots and culture shapes our health, stress, and coping, pretty much health outcomes of Latinx peoples in the US, right? So with me, someone who has been reconnecting to our indigeneity and my families, and how that has brought me and my family and community so much healing and empowerment. So it very much shapes how I want to understand other people's experiences as well. And so that's what I do in my research, is kind of better understanding how this impacts our lives and how we can incorporate more of these resources within our communities as part of the healing, as part of the empowerment. So that's how it relates to my work.
Thank you, Alejandro, Danielle, and Irene. I know the three of you for a while now because we have been drumming together and getting together as a community of indigenous descendants, right, who are Yuto-Aztecan, Mesoamerican, and proud. And my next question for you is, what is NISC, the Native Indigenous Student Coalition, and how does NISC contribute, in your opinion, to diversifying education, the professoriate, and the workplace? And how does it impact, the spaces where we learn and work and do research? What would you say to other students about NISC?
Well, for me, I feel like when I first came to Merced, I kind of was a little lost in a way, in the sense that like I was far from home and I didn't yet have like a space or community yet that I can sort of go to and like practice like singing or drumming or even just have like ceremony. And when I found NISC, I feel like it was that community that I needed away from home, and it really helped me ground myself and really I feel like it really also helped my mental stress. I feel that's like ceremony always grounds me and helps me do better in my studies. So when I started like being more involved with this, I saw myself like not being such in a depressive state or sort of like feeling like I don't belong, but I started to feel like more confident in myself, and I started to see that like my mood and my stress was like not low and it was high, and I mean that I was happy. And I feel like with other students, I always like encourage them and tell them like, even I feel like it's that one conversation that needs to happen that I feel that can like spark something in someone, and they like want to learn more, want to reconnect. And I feel like that's what I strive for in this, is that I want to start those conversations. And like it only takes that one conversation to really get someone thinking like kind of waking them up and be like, hey, like I want to reconnect to my indigenous roots. Like I want to know more. I want to know more history. I want to like come to these spaces. These spaces make me feel safe. These spaces make me feel like I can talk to others about what's going on. I can ask for help. I can ask for resources. So yeah, that's what I feel that like NISC has given me.
I can speak. So a lot of my experiences are very similar to what Irene just said. When I first came to Merced as a graduate student, you know, I was coming from Southern California, coming from being connected with the community where I would often practice ceremony and culture and participate in culture events and gatherings and that kind of thing. And so it was very much part of the norm in my life, which brought me a lot of balance, a lot of grounding. And so for many of us, indigenous values, and culture and ceremony really help keep us balanced, help to guide us as we navigate, you know, society and the stress that comes with it. So when I came to Merced, I was looking for a community, and that's when I found NISC, Native and Indigenous Student Coalition, which at the time was called Native American Student Coalition, I believe, NASC. And so that provided me with a space with people. And originally, from what I understand, NISC was supposed to be a place, you know, that can provide students with resources such as scholarships or, you know, driving together to like a powwow, connecting with other universities and their Native American clubs and organizations, kind of helping students to extend their networks and access to like scholarships and that kind of thing. And sometimes also ceremony. So, you know, my experience, we've been doing that. We've also been doing a lot of drum circles on campus at UCM, especially before the pandemic. We would do drum circles and just invite a lot of students and staff, and sometimes professors will come in. It'll really help a lot of people, help them cope with academic and societal stressors. And we would do like cultural workshops. We've made hand drums before. We have all these ideas that we want to do still, but because of the pandemic, it kind of slowed down. So that's what it has helped me with. It has helped provide me with a community here in Merced. And also through that connection, we're connected to indigenous communities in Merced outside of the academy, right? So there's that connection too, where we do have opportunities to gather and collectively and do ritual ceremony outside of campus. And that's what it has helped me with, provide me with a social support, a community, and a space to do these things, which is very, very important because as Irene said, you know, it really helps us kind of guide us as we navigate the stressors in academia. So that's my experience.
Yeah, I do agree with what Irene and Alejandra said, you know, and I think NISC is such an important space. And I've seen how even when we've done the drum circles on campus, just when you hear the sounds and the music and the singing, there's students that are just curious that walk by and they ask, what's going on? I want to join, right? And it's really a great way to build community, especially, I know it's been really important. There's been times where NISC has done drum circles for healing, for instance. I know that like Tamara, when she was president of NISC, she did a lot of drum circles that were related to Black Lives Matter. And I think those are very important moments of solidarity and community building that have been in moments that have been very difficult, especially in 2015, right? We had UCM went through a violent incident on campus, and kind of holding space and drumming in that moment, and kind of being there for one another was also really important. And Alejandro talked about the drum that we made. I don't know if you can see it, right, where we've made these drums, and Irene, I know, has done beading work, and I think it's just been a really important space on campus to I guess, as you say, like diversify our communities, and also really just bring the whole person to the campus, where a lot of times just seen as like the student and the academic, but I think it's a space where I can be fully myself and not just a slice of I have to be a PhD student and always be in the research process, right? It's part of like the emotional, kind of the mental health aspect that you all talked about already. I think it's so important. But I really enjoyed being with NISC, and I really have to give a big shout out to Alejandro, because he's always invited me and others to the space and has always made it very welcoming. So I have to say, like, Alejandro's like a big person, I think, that I would always associate with NISC and the success of NISC. Honestly, I just personally say that. But yeah, but it's everybody. Yeah.
I also wanted to yeah, shout out Alejandro too. Like, it was kind of crazy how we connected too, because when I first joined, as I said, like I was introduced by Alondra, also known as Lonnie, and I remember when she brought me to a meeting, it was me, her, and Alejandro, and I ended up finding out that like we're like from the same community, and like he had even like known my mom, and it's just like the circle always brings you together, and like we're always connected. So yeah, shout out.
Me too. Shout out to Alejandro. And there's other people, right, who are already not here because they moved on, who also contributed very positively to this. And I wanted to like amplify what Danielle and Alejandro and Irene have said, right? Here's my Native American drum, which, you know, we used for the first time during that violent incident that UC Merced, where a fellow student was shot and killed. And so we held space for that student and for the community to heal. And it's, you know, a special time for us because we were able to bond and we were able to help others bond, right? So I know that I haven't congratulated NISC, but I would like to do that at this point, give you a big shout out and congratulations, because you have gotten an award of $5,000 from the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. So congratulations on that. I wanted to ask you, why is free speech and civic engagement important to Indigenous people and its descendants and for everybody in the community? Why does it matter? What does the grant allow you to do that you possibly could not do without it? Can you tell us a little about?
Danielle, would you like to start?
Sure. So yeah, this year, the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement, they have different programs that they do, but I saw an email announcement earlier in the year that they were doing this initiative called the Voice Initiative. I know I messaged some of the NIST members like, hey, should we apply to this grant? What do you all think? Yes or no? And they were offering $5,000 to do different kind of free speech programming. So, you know, I applied through NISC and through another club that's the Grad Students of Color Coalition as like a joint kind of programming. And we actually got awarded the funds, and the project was really about Indigenous voices, Native and Indigenous voices. And the theme has been on breaking barriers and building community. And I know like Irene and Alejandro can talk about the different speakers maybe we've brought so far and the ones that are upcoming. But, you know, I think when I think about like free speech or civic engagement, it seems like a very kind of like Western concept that, you know, seems like it would be kind of not the language that Indigenous communities would use necessarily to express how they're feeling. But I think it's important to reframe kind of this idea of like amplifying and honoring our Native ancestors and our Indigenous voices, past, present, and future. And I saw the grant as an opportunity to really kind of honor their voices of people in our local community, especially in the Central Valley. but also elsewhere, right? And really promote their voices and be able to give back to them. Because a lot of times in academia, there's like people that do research about Indigenous communities without really consulting them, or really working one-on-one with them, or kind of taking from them and then never speaking to that community ever again, or whatever it is, right? So I think part of this for me was like, it would be really great to actually invite speakers that are from the local community and hear from them, right? And hear what they are expressing as needs and important parts of what their community is needing. And I think, we see ourselves having some great talks so far. We've done, Two-Spirit talk and manhood through Indigenous perspectives. And I'm going to kind of let Irene and Alejandro say if they want to mention any other feature talks that are coming up. But I think it's just really important to highlight, right, Indigenous voices, where a lot of times we're often not heard as much or haven't been heard in a long time, but we've always been there, and we've always been having teachings and learnings that we learn from one another and across different communities too. So yeah, that was kind of the goal with it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our next talk by Cecilia. I know I connected with her also when I was doing my own research in the summer. And yeah, so her upcoming talk on Native American revitalization is going to be really awesome and cool. I feel like it's really important to have her voice, especially because we are not taught the history of local Indigenous peoples in our schools. And I feel like having that space for her is really going to mean a lot for everyone. It's going to mean a lot for me, and learning more about the peoples, and especially the peoples of the land that we are here at UC Merced as UC Merced students. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited. We have a lot of good talks coming. We're still lining up speakers. So right now we also have a talk on women's empowerment. We have a talk on medicinal plant usage. Different ones, remind me. But the way I see this, putting together these talks, congratulations to Danielle for getting this grant to give us the opportunity to do this. But I see these talks as very important because, like you all mentioned, it's about connecting the community members with the university, with students. But in these talks, there's students, there's community members, there's people from all over. We send out the invites, and it's very important because we come together in these spaces and we exchange this information, sacred information. We learn from one another, and we all have knowledge. Like every single participant that attends, we all have our knowledge, so we learn from one another. And it's important to give community members, elders, and members of Indigenous communities that opportunity to speak, for us to listen to what they have to say, to share their voices. Because like you all said, a lot of these things are excluded in academia. We don't really learn these perspectives. And when we do, it's not so much in detail. So this also gives that opportunity to kind of go in depth on particular topics as we have organized these talk series. So I'm very much looking forward to our next speakers, and I invite you all to participate. And the next one that's coming on Monday will be on California Native American revitalization and reviving and basket weaving, which is awesome. So I invite you all to attend.
Great. Is it online or?
Can you all put up the flyer, or?
We can definitely put up the flyer at the end of the workshop, and we'll give you the Zoom information. Yes, it is online. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, moving to next question. I know that you talked about your research and how it is related to your background, but I would like to ask, maybe you could talk a little bit more about your projects and what you are doing, your research area, and yeah, and definitely how it is related to your indigenous background.
I guess I can go first just because I'm excited. I got the Public Humanities Grant Project with UROC H. And in the summer, I was a UROC H scholar. So basically, with the Public Grant Project, I basically take my research over the summer and I sort of present it to the public. And the project that I created is called the Reclaiming Narratives Project. And this is the description. So, when narratives come from those within the specific Native community, that knowledge shared is transformative. This project aims to challenge dominant narratives about Indigenous people that have contributed to misrepresentation and homogenization. The goal is to regenerate positive and educational histories that come from Native perspectives. This project will hold a space for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to share their experiences in a forum that will harness empowerment and confidence through storytelling. So that was my project that I'm still currently working on and I'm really excited about. I basically learned how to also build my own website in which I'm putting all this information that I did over the summer, and I made a storybook that was specific to museums in Merced County because that was my research over the summer. And I basically created an educational storybook that discusses important issues regarding museums and their power to represent Indigenous people, which needs to be critiqued. And sort of some guiding questions that were like, in my mind while I was doing my research is like, whose perspective are they representing? What is the historical relationship between Indigenous peoples and museums? And sort of thinking about even the material objects showcased and exhibitions, like asking questions like, are they stolen? Were they given? Were they found? And yeah, I've been really excited. My website is going to launch soon. So that's a little bit of the research I've been doing so far.
I guess I could go next, if that's okay. I know I talked a little bit about like my earlier work doing research in El Salvador, and you know, in 2018, it's been really awesome I was able to go between 2018 and 2019 for about a year abroad, and that completely transformed, right, the way that I did my work and approached my work, because I got to actually meet with Indigenous communities that I had read so much about and had, you know, family connections to. But it's one thing to read the academic literature, and it's another to like actually engage with the communities that you're working with and hear directly from them. And your work changes, right? You may have an expectation of this is what I'm doing, but when you get there and you're talking with the communities, right, they're telling you actually this is really what we need, right? Or this is the focus we've been pushing for. And so it's kind of helped change a little bit of like how I rethought my work. And mine has focused, I know Alejandra has talked about this, right, but that impact of colonialism, the impact of massacre and genocide on Indigenous communities is really strong. And in El Salvador, there was a big massacre in 1932 that killed around 30,000 Indigenous Nahuatl communities. And it really affected and changed the trajectory of the history of El Salvador ever since that massacre. It started the military dictatorships in El Salvador for decades. We've been, according to Eric Ching's research, El Salvador has been the longest kind of Latin American country that's been most under dictatorship than democracy than any other Latin American country. And so that massacre took a huge toll on the Indigenous communities, on the language, being able to publicly practice spirituality and religion being able to speak the Nahuatl language, right? And just being able to do a lot of things. And it doesn't mean that it disappeared. That was kind of the big lie that was told after this massacre, that, you know, all the communities were eliminated and wiped out. And this is a common kind of trope we've seen across Native and Indigenous communities, right? Is to say we eliminate the Native person, they're not here anymore. And it's part of that colonization process to say we don't exist. And what research has really shown is we have always been there and resisted, despite, you know, the constant erasure, and the constant kind of like demonizing of Indigenous communities, right? And saying that they're bad people, or they're communists in the case of El Salvador, or they're witches or brujos, right? They say they're witches to try to use kind of that faith against them, the religion, kind of Catholic faith, to say they're not good people. And so those stigmas are still really strong and present today. And you know, a lot of the advocacy work right now in El Salvador has been focused on language revitalization, on spirituality. That's been extremely strong to reclaim the spiritual practices and to be able to do a public ceremony. It wasn't until 2012, right? And this is in Professor Robin DeLuga's work. It wasn't until then, after the peace accords, after the war in the 80s, that people actually started to do public commemorations and ceremonies. And the first kind of ceremonies and things were happening 2007, 2012, around there. And it was the first time people actually got to mourn in public over this 1932 massacre for the first time. And people couldn't visit their loved ones who were buried in mass graves. And so this is really huge right now, and people are really strongly trying to learn Nahuatl Pipil. There's a lot of young people in the universities that are trying to relearn the language that is their mother tongue. And they're trying to do different efforts of like they call it Cuna Nahuatl, which is like from baby, right? The cribs of Nahuatl, where they're teaching young babies and children to from Nahuatl speakers to learn the language. And so from little on, instead of, you know, not having it taught in schools, which was the case for a long time. And right now, our language, we have less than 200 maternal native speakers. And so it's really important. For instance, the language revitalization process is really important, or else we're going to lose that language of Nahuatl Pipil in specific. And it has driven me to pursue also learning Nahuatl that is from Mexico, right? From Mixco, Huasteca Veracruzana. And my instructor, Abelardo de la Cruz, he's going to be one of the speakers actually later on in April. But he's really pushed me and helped me learn those connections, right, of Nahuatl de Mexico and the importance of Nahuatl of El Salvador. So I think the language conveys so much knowledge and conveys so much embodiment. You can see how Nahuatl is so much about the personal and the body when you're speaking it. Like just to even say, like, you know, what people we say, like, Yekni Metsi Shmati, that's like, my eye is happy to know you. When you're meeting someone, like to say it's good to know you or good to meet you. But it includes body parts, right? Like your heart or your eye to say something, to convey a sentiment. And so that has enriched so much my work. And to be able to really connect personally with the research and know that this is part of my family history, but also part of why it's so important to continue to do this work, whether it's for academia or for our communities. I think, it's so important because these communities want these stories to be told, and they tell you, please share these stories because we're not heard, and we're fighting so hard in our countries to get our rights gained. So I think that's, to me, why it's kind of motivated me to keep doing this work, even though it's so hard in academia at times to feel like people value the kind of Indigenous work or research that you're doing. But I think it's important for the communities, and like the work that Irene is doing is really also super amazing, right? But I know Alejandro is also doing awesome work too, so I'll let him speak.
Yeah, my work relates so much to what Danielle said. It has to do with since the beginning of European settler colonialism, when they first came in contact with indigenous peoples of what is now referred to as the Americas, there's been an attempt to kill the Indian within indigenous peoples, right? To erase indigenous identities, cultures, belief systems, foods, languages, all of these things, right? And this has largely contributed to how we experience life today. We people considered today Latinx, which is also Eurocentric identity labels that are being imposed because they do not acknowledge our indigenous histories and cultures. Words such as labels, identity labels such as Latinx, Hispanic, even Mexican, some people have problematized it because it very much generalizes and doesn't really acknowledge our indigenous histories and cultures. So colonization and attempts to erase our indigeneity has shaped why we speak English today, Spanish today, why many of us no longer speak our indigenous languages as fluently, even though there's still many words that we do speak that are indigenous, many of which a lot of people don't even know. They think it's Spanish. Like, I'll share a few Nahuatl words like zacate, coyote, cacahuate, chipotle, tomate. And some of these words are even English too now, right? But they derive from indigenous languages. So anyway, these attempts to erase, right, has shaped our experiences today. And like I mentioned earlier, also shaped our current conditions, poverty, which then shapes our health outcomes, puts us at higher risk of becoming ill and even early mortality rates. So a lot of health disparities. So what my work does, what I do is, a lot of us have been kind of disconnected from our indigeneity. Obviously not everyone, like Danielle said, but there's a big movement. A lot of people are trying to reconnect to their indigenous roots, right? And culture and languages. And my work looks at that. It's like, what is that like? How does reconnecting to your indigenous roots, culture, ritual ceremonies, how does that shape your stress that you experience? How does it shape how you heal, the coping, right? And how does it shape your overall well-being? So I look at how learning about colonial histories, which, there's a lot of trauma there, how that creates additional stressors, how there's a lot of policing of indigenous identity, also that stems from colonization and colonial racial projects that continue today, by the way. They're still trying to completely erase our indigeneity. And so there's that push and pull, and some people are trying to recover and reclaim the little that they have and reconnect. So in many ways, it can create stressors, but I also look at the way reconnection to indigeneity becomes a resource of coping, healing, and empowerment. So in my work, I also look at how participation in ritual ceremonies such as sweat lodges, temazcal, drum circle, healing circles, and like traditional dance, how these things, help individuals, Mexican Americans, and my work right now, I'm looking at Mexican Americans, how it contributes to them, how they understand their indigeneity, their identities, and how that really brings them a lot of healing and how it helps them to deconstruct a lot of these identities and stereotypes that I mentioned earlier, like Latinx, Hispanic, and stereotypes of indigenous peoples, which are often very negative. They're often seen as like inferior, as practicing, like Danielle said, brujeria, demonic practices, that kind of stuff. So kind of deconstructing our realities, our perceptions, and reconnecting to our values and roots and culture and foods and all these things. So it's important to mention how a lot of people talk about colonization and separation of indigeneity, but there's still a lot of indigeneity within, for example, mainstream Mexican culture, mainstream Mexican American culture. I mentioned some of the Nahuatl words, but there's also like the foods, a lot of the foods that we eat are still very indigenous, the beans, the squash, the corn, everything corn-based pretty much, right? There's a lot of that. We're still connected. So when a lot of people think that they're completely disconnected, but we're not. They just try to tell us that we are, but we're still very connected. And if you take it to a deeper level, right, we're always connected. We're breathing this air, these elements. We are the elements. Taking it to a deeper indigenous perspective, like there is no separation. We are the universe. But anyway, that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, that's what I look at, is how reconnection to our roots shape stress, coping, and health outcomes. And so one last thing, how does it relate to my indigeneity? Well, I'm part of this. I situate myself within the research as well. You know, I don't believe in the whole being objective thing. It's like, you know, that's more of the Western perspective of being objective, but I see it more of my positionality. Like I am situated within these communities. I am part of these communities. I have my own experiences. And so all of this also shapes the data and the findings and the results in my work.
Thank you so much. It was great explanation. So moving to the next question. Why did you choose to come to UC Merced for grad school? Or more specifically, what's your favorite thing about being an indigenous student here at UC Merced?
For me, my favorite thing has been like getting to meet other people, like all of you guys, of course, and also getting to connect with natives of the Central Valley, like Cecilia and her mother Carmen and other elders that I've met so far. I feel like that's like a really important connection that I have made up here, and it kind of reminds me, like when I go back home to LA, it's like we're not really like separate, like we're like connected, and it's just like having that connection is like, I felt like it was really beautiful, and I am grateful that I came to Merced. I remember I felt like I either had a choice to just stay back home or come to Merced, and I'm happy that I took that leap of faith and I came to Merced, because without it I wouldn't be where I am now, and I wouldn't have met all of you guys. And yeah.
I guess I'll go next. I guess I, chose UC Merced particularly because I was taking a class in my undergrad that the instructor, so the department was in Chicano studies, and I went to undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, and it was the one class in Chicano studies that was called Central Americans. So I got super excited to take a class on Central America, and so the Chicano studies department for me had always felt like a second home away from my home, because right, even though a lot of it was focused on Mexico or Mexican American experiences, I feel like I could resonate with so much of what they were teaching and sharing with us. And so taking classes in that department for me was like really empowering on that campus that was considered like a PWI, like a predominantly white institution. And it really made a lot of connections, especially when we were learning like Chicana feminisms or women of color in the feminist studies department. But this one class on Central Americans was taught by Professor Horacio Roque Ramirez. And that was like the first Salvadoran I ever met that had a PhD. I had never met anyone else that had a PhD that was Salvi. And the way he taught the class was so beautiful and empowering. And he spoke about this 1932 massacre in El Salvador, and it really prompted me to start asking a lot of questions in my own family about the history of El Salvador and indigenous communities. And I found this story right from my grandmother. She told me about her mother. So this is the story of my great grandmother who survived this violence of 1932, of this massacre. And the story stuck with me because my grandma says, yes, my mother used to sleep with a machete at night as a single woman during 1932 to defend herself from the violence, right? And there was a lot of sexual violence also happening with the soldiers, the military against women. And so it kind of stuck with me of like, whoa, you know, this single woman in El Salvador defended herself, survived this violence in 1932. And it just was like, wow, to me, it really, really like stuck, like personal, kind of pulled on my heartstrings. And so from there, you know, I felt so encouraged by this professor to pursue graduate school. And I didn't realize at the time I could actually do a whole research study and a whole PhD on El Salvador. What? Like, I had no idea that you could do this. And he actually connected me with Professor Robin DeLugan to speak with her on the phone. And that's how I came to be interested in UC Merced, because of her being here and the work that she's done in El Salvador and indigenous communities. And then later, Professor Arturo Arias came, and he's, you know, very world renowned for his research on Maya literature in Guatemala. And so from there, I started working also with Professor Arias, and his work, especially his book that defended Rigoberta Menchú, that really was like really important to me, that he defended a powerful indigenous woman, right, after being accused that she was making up her story about surviving the 1980s kind of violence in Guatemala. And so I would just say that probably all of this kind of really inspired me to come to UCM and to continue this work. And probably my favorite thing about being an Indigenous descendant or an Indigenous student at UCM has actually just been connecting with NISC. You know, there's a moment, the 2 years that, you know, 1 year and a half I was gone, I really missed actually having those connections with people because I was far away. But being with NISC and just meeting different people, working with Irene this year has been awesome. And it's always been like a really great space. And I had fun. This year we got to do like a 5K run that they dedicated the funds to Native and Indigenous communities, especially local communities. And to see like the local communities come out and run and participate in the 5K, that was really cool. And they did the Taloma Grove dedication, but you know, just really actually meeting and connecting with like local folks. I think that's been really exciting, and the kind of community work that is possible to be done here. I think that's what's probably been my favorite thing.
Was the question again why we chose UC Merced and what do we like about UC Merced? Was that the question?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I honestly see it this way. I see it like, you can see it either way, but you can also see it as, I feel like UC Merced chose me. You know, the creator brought me to this area, and yeah, there's this, you know, there's an ups and downs, there's challenges that come with it. But what I really appreciate about UC Merced are the students, at least with my experience and the courses that I've taught and TA'd for, amazing students, you know, and that's been a very good experience for me. But also the opportunity to, when I'm in those positions of teaching, you know, opportunity to kind of share knowledge with students and also to learn from them, because they have their own cultural wealth and knowledge based on their, you know, upbringing and experiences. So learning a lot from my students as well, and sharing information, what I've learned from them. And also, I really appreciate connecting with the Native and Latinx indigenous communities outside of UC Merced and local communities here, and also extending to cultural events in the Central Valley, Native and indigenous cultural events in the Central Valley. I think that's been amazing because it has really helped me expand my network from Southern California and now in Central California and even parts of Northern California. So it's just part of expanding that network. And since I've been here, like I mentioned, there's been ups and downs, challenges being in Merced. You know, we can't just say it's all good on it, obviously, but my committee, my advisors, they've been really good to me. I can't really complain where I am right now. So I'm going to say that I'm grateful. I can also say that UC Merced is obviously growing. When I first came here, it was like half, maybe less the size of what it is now. And with the institution growing, I'm optimistic that there's going to be more cultural events. I would love to see a lot more cultural, indigenous, Native American culture events on campus, more of that presentation, awareness of these things happening, more connection. Yes, definitely. I would love to see a powwow, which has been in conversation with faculty, but we're still waiting on an update from that. I would love to see more connections with local indigenous communities and Native American communities, the Yoka, Miwok, Mono, different communities. It'll be great. So I see, whenever there's a bureaucratic institution, things always move very slowly, but I would like to see a lot more of that. Other than that, that's it, I guess. I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question about, and you may be getting close to the last few questions, right? This is a kind of like a two-part question about your research, about your integrating your background as Indigenous descendants and carriers of the knowledge, protectors of the land. What advice do you have for fellow students who are interested in conducting Indigenous research, who may not be of Indigenous backgrounds? And why is it important to understand one's positionality and grounding, knowing that not just at UC Merced, but at the academy, right? Our graduation rates for Native and Indigenous peoples are almost non-existent. So what advice would you give fellow students who are interested in pursuing this kind of work?
I don't know, it just makes me think of, there's a lot of work out there on Indigenous methodologies that you can research and read. And it's really good at explaining how they say in the literature, how to do research with Native Indigenous communities in a good way, in a respectful way. And Danielle mentioned some of this earlier. It's about, part of it is about, you're not just kind of extracting Indigenous communities' knowledges and then that's it, just to benefit. It has to do with, why are your intentions for doing the research? What are your intentions? Are they to work in collaboration with Indigenous communities to help to benefit them as well? Or is it just you trying to benefit yourself? And that's important. So it talks about working together with communities to help, to assist, help to benefit them and uplift them, right? So you're kind of like working with them in that way. So it has to do with that. It has to do with so much more, like Violet said, your positionality. Who are you? What are your biases that you bring, your perceptions, and how is that gonna influence how you see Indigenous people, how you see yourself, but also understand how you might be seen by other people. Everything, all these things matter. Some Indigenous communities may not want to work with particular people, and it's about respecting that. It's not about being angry about that, So asking for permission. Sometimes some Indigenous communities may not want to talk about certain things, because they want to keep it sacred and secret. And it's about respecting that too. So it has to do with these kind of things, just communicating with them and respecting that their knowledges are, like they say in the literature, right? A lot of the things are coming, like their knowledges are complete systems of knowledge, not just alternative ways of knowing, but complete systems of knowing. And I know everyone else could say so many other things, but these are just some of the little things to know when working with Indigenous communities. But I would really look up indigenous methodologies, on the database and see what comes up.
Yeah, I agree with what Alejandro said. I think one common one that is like a common book a lot of us read or are told to read is the Linda Tuhiwai Smith's book, right? Decolonizing Methodologies. And she works with Maori community. She's a Maori researcher. And she's done really awesome models, like the Kaupapa Maori research model that is really based on their principles and Maori worldviews, right? Of what research for them would look like that really kind of keeps their voice in their autonomy and agency at like the forefront of the work with Indigenous and non-Indigenous researchers. And especially, right, the free, prior, and informed consent being so important. But I would say, just like Alejandro said, it's really important, the positionality, the power and privileges that you have, and something that, even though I know my family has now people connections on the Salvadoran side and on my dad's side, right? He's Puerto Rican, and I know, it ties up with that Taino history, but also with Afro-Indigenous histories. I think it would be wrong to also exclude the African history in Latin America, right? But I think, when I come into doing research, like when I did my Fulbright research in El Salvador, even though I have that connection to Nahuatl people as like a descendant, just like Alejandro said, they're still wary, like, oh, you're coming from the US, who are you, right? And you have to build that connection and trust with those communities. Sometimes they may want to give you certain knowledges and other times they may not, and that's okay. And it's part of that kind of sacred knowledge that for them is so valuable that they don't want to give the academy that sacred knowledge. And I think that's really important, to respect their dignity, their autonomy, their own sovereignty, right? What they wish is so important. And so that positionality really played a role. It's like, yes, I may see myself as a Nahuatl descendant, right? But it's a very different experience from being Nahuatl people living in El Salvador too, right? And they have their own struggles with the government and their own struggles with land and with other issues. And so like you kind of feel like you're inside outsider in a way as a researcher. And so I think taking time to build with the community, making sure that they know who you are, what your intentions are. And people like to say, right, being an allyship with communities, but I would also say, like, don't just dub yourself an ally, like, I'm an ally, right? That's something the community gives to you as a title. To see that you've done the work and you're continuing to do the work. You're not just going to drop them the first second that you leave. And really, people have talked about like camaraderie and talked about being like, in alliance with the communities, not just like, I don't know, not just like taking from them. And so for me, like, I always think about these two kind of quotes. And one is, Audre Lorde, that I think it's important to cite her. She's a Black feminist scholar. She says, I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. And I am not free as long as one person of color remains chained, nor is any one of you. And I think this is important because it's getting to the question that Violet was asking, right? If you may not be an Indigenous researcher, you can still pursue this research, but you have to be very aware of not appropriating or not taking up too much space. But it's really about building that solidarity and making sure that you're not the one speaking in the mic as like, I'm going to take the mic away, right? You pass the mic to that person that you're working with or to that community. And the other quote I think about often is like, this one's also kind of popular, that is an Aboriginal activist. Her name's Lila Watson. And she says, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I think that's important too, because we have to see as our liberation between different communities as bound up with one another. And I think, just like Alejandro said, that kind of dignity, justice, and respect is going to be very key to how you pursue the research. But yeah, I don't know, Irene, if you have advice for folks.
I agree with everything you guys said. I feel like what came to mind was this idea of reciprocity. And it's like you're not only extracting, but you're also like doing like this giving back and this sort of like active collaboration. And yeah, I feel like as an undergrad, I feel like I look forward to my classes as a crest major because we like start off like reading like decolonizing methodologies and like Linda T. Smith's book. And I feel like now that I'm getting ready to go to graduate school, I feel like learning about that and reading like Audre Lorde and other BIPOC writers and stuff, I feel like I feel prepared and I feel excited and to sort of have this sort of non-Eurocentric way of like doing research and even thinking about research.
Okay, great. I think this is going to be the last question. So what advice do you have for other students that are interested in UC Merced grad school or maybe some indigenous research?
Well, I guess I will say from like an undergrad perspective, I feel like at first thought, I feel like Merced won't be your first choice. And I feel like I even was in that position, Merced wasn't my first choice. But as I said, like at the end, I'm so happy I made this choice. I feel like here I do see a lot of people who look like me. I built like this community away from home, and I really feel like UC Merced really gives you that's like a chance to sort of like lead something and start something new, like basically like be pioneers. And I really love that about UC Merced. I feel like that part of UC Merced is so underrated. And yeah.
I can go. So can you please repeat the question one more time?
Oh, sure. So I was asking about what advice do you have for other students that are interested in indigenous research or UC Merced grad school?
Hmm. Well, when it comes to research on indigenous communities, there's so much that you can do. Land, food, language, decolonization, revival. So, it just depends on what the students want to do. But obviously start with the literature. What does the literature say? And do you find gaps there? Is there some things you want to learn more about? Then pursue it. How does it align with your research interest? What you want to do, what fascinates you, what makes you wake up in the morning, as they say, and want to do research, want to read about things, connect it with that, with your own research interest. As far as UC Merced, I can only speak for sociology department because that's where I'm in. I can say that now we have more professors who do work in indigenous communities within our department. We have more professors of color as well. And a lot of these professors are, from my experience, are amazing at what they do and their mentorship as well. So when it comes to wanting to do research, the first thing you got to do is really see what the professors are doing, what kind of research are they doing, and if it relates to what you want to do, then connect with them. email them, ask them questions if they're taking students, if they can potentially be your mentor, advisor, if you were to get accepted and UC Merced sociology, and have those conversations. You know, that's some good advice that I was given. So I definitely want to share that with students now. Do your research on professors. What are they working on? And you know, they've told me also that even if you want to go to a school and the professors there are not really doing work on what you want to do, and if you really want to go there, any professor can still help you with the research steps. You know, help you how to do literature review and come up with a research question and all that stuff, because that's how we're trained to have those expertise. But I would really suggest trying to align yourself with someone who does similar work. Yeah, who can share that knowledge with you and train you better in that way, because they have that expertise. So that's what I'll say. Oh, also graduate students. You know, if you're thinking of applying for a program, you can also look at what the graduate students are doing, and they can also be people who can help you, because they also have that connection and expertise and knowledge of the literature and all that stuff. That's my advice.
I think any advice I would have for fellow students with probably for undergrads interested in grad school, I would say what Alejandro said, right? What I did was reach out to the TAs, because I felt really comfortable talking to certain TAs and asking them about their process for applying. And so, you know, I mentioned Horacio was like a huge motivator for me to go to grad school, and his TA Esther, you know, she really helped me like being able to ask for like letters of recommendation and tips on writing your personal statements or what you're going to intend to research in grad school, or even just kind of gathering all the paperwork, like all the transcripts and everything, right? Like having that kind of grad mentor really helped me in the process to apply to grad school, because I didn't know at all what to do, right? I've always heard, right, as an undergrad, try to do research if you can, especially maybe in areas that you're really passionate about. So like Irene, I know has been working on UROC H research. And so like being able to do research, especially at UCM, if you're at UCM, I think there's good opportunities where you can engage with research with professors, and having that kind of small community feel of the campus allows you to kind of approach the professor in a way that at bigger schools makes it a lot more difficult. And yeah, I mean, also the financial advice I got was, you know, don't go to a school where you're going to be having to pay so much out of pocket, right? Really, the school that you go to should be willing to offer you something. And UC Merced was definitely one that offered a good financial package when I first applied. And so that's something I was told. And I think advice for students interested in Indigenous work, what we talked about earlier, but I think, you know, really just familiarizing yourself with the work. I know I did a summer session at like UC Davis, and they have a great Native American Studies program at Davis. So like being able to take like a Native American literature class in undergrad was like really awesome, because I was able to familiarize myself with Native American scholars and make those linkages with Latinx kind of Indigenous scholars in Central America at least. And so that was really great. So as Alejandro said, engage literature. There's so much out there. There's so much great like fiction and nonfiction that's out there. If you're interested and you're like an avid reader of like fiction, there's so much that you can read in poetry. And you know, if you're thinking like Native American work, there's like Joy Harjo and Gerald Bissinger, right? That are kind of like seen as the classics in a way. And so those are scholars that really like Joy Harjo's work is really beautiful poetry that she's done. So I would just say like engage. There's so much online too, like on YouTube, there's so much information you can have. And just do your research, right? What are things that you're passionate about, that you're interested in pursuing, and have really kind of those open and honest intentions to pursue with the communities or in the areas that you know you want to go. Like if you want to be in the Central Valley, right? What are the issues that are happening in the Valley? Is this a good place where you can engage with the kind of things you're passionate about? Because I think there's so many things, right? We have a Centro Binacional Oaxaqueña that's in Fresno that has a huge like Oaxacan community that you can engage in doing work, right, with Oaxacan indigenous communities. And they do the Guelaguetza, right? I think with COVID they were impacted, right? But prior they had the huge Guelaguetza that was like really beautiful to go to in Fresno. And just different, like Alejandro said, different powwows and cultural events. CSU Stanislaus does a lot of events, right, at CSU Fresno. So check those out. Come to our talk series. I think you can hear also from a lot of amazing speakers. And yeah, talk to the professors here too. If you're interested at UC Merced, we have now more professors that are doing Indigenous research. Like Alejandro said, in sociology, they just hired Blythe George, who's a new scholar that is doing great work. I think in interdisciplinary humanities in my program, they hired Felicia Lopez, right? That she's doing great work as well. She's new, and Robin DeLugan and Arturo Arias that are doing Indigenous work, and different graduate students that are doing Indigenous work. In the merit writing program, Iris Reese does a lot of like the Chicano studies type of work that is really cool. So just check out the different programs, see who's out there, talk to the grad students, talk to other fellow students, and the local community members if you can, and check it out, right? So that was what I would kind of share.
Thank you so much, Danielle, Alejandro, and Irene. We really appreciate your time and sharing information about NISC, the Voices grant, the work that you're doing on campus to help us diversify education, our learning communities, our working communities, the research, which is extremely important. And on behalf of the Graduate Student Association, we are very thankful to you and we wish you the best success for your graduation, for finding work, and also, you know, to keep the sacred knowledges alive and revitalizing languages and outfits that are sometimes not told about, right? So we really appreciate your time and your amazing work, and especially thank you because we know that the Native American and Indigenous community at UC Merced and in all the universities is not that big, it's very small, so it's difficult sometimes, very challenging, but we really appreciate it. As in, I don't know if you want to say anything.
No, I'm okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we just want to, you know, let's close that by saying that maybe in the future we would like to invite Professor DeLugan and other UC scholars who have been working with NAFRA at the UC level, right, to help us understand what does it mean to have a university that is built upon Indigenous land, and also, you know, to help us understand how we're dealing today with how we're reckoning with the past in terms of, you know, having been part of taking Indigenous remains, Indigenous baskets, Indigenous knowledges, and have them as part of the university. But now, you know, we have people who are working very hard to return those Indigenous possessions, right, culture, Indigenous remains, etc., to their rightful owners. And so we look forward to continue this conversation, and thank you so much, all of you, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for the space. Okay, everyone, so we invite you to our next talk. This is the flyer for Monday, this Monday, March 28th, 6 to 7 p.m., where Cecilia Moreno will be doing a talk on Native American revitalization and basket weaving. So as you can see, the Zoom link and passcode is there. So share this, invite your friends, family, and we look forward to seeing you there.
And here, I think in green, we have a flyer for all the events that NISC has been working on with the with the Graduate Student of Color Coalition. Showing, beyond Monday, I think on the 4th of April, we have youth from the Central Valley talking about decolonizing through healing and culture. We have then a women's empowerment circle. We have Eddie Cermeño talking about indigenous plant medicine. On April 25th, we will bring Nahua speakers from the Huasteca Veracruzana in Mexico that will give us a talk, their research talks, mostly in Nahuatl language. And the last one for the semester will be a group of indigenous elders from Cuxcatan who are going to talk about their persistence and survivance in Cuxcatan. So again, thank you so much, everybody. We'll make these flyers available and post them for you all to see and join us at this event. Thank you all.